I'm delighted to have with me Professor Zimitri Erasmus from Wits and Dr. Nosipho Mngomezulu and Miss Leyya Hoosen, also from Wits Anthropology, who initiated the project at the beginning, and our brave colleagues from Northwest and Stellenbosch, who didn't have writing intensive courses, but were brave enough and willing to join us on this project. And we have today with us Jess Auerbach, Chris Holdridge, Anke Froehlich, Claudia Jansen van Rensburg, Esther-Marie Pauw, and Miss Alene Holder, all from music, and Jess and Chris from history and anthropology. Right. So to tell you something about the writing program, all writing intensive courses are based on this principle that writing is not packaging or an afterthought, but writing is the thinking. It's the generating of thought, and it's the creation of texts which act. So all writing intensive courses employ both writing to think through things, to generate ideas, to understand things, as well as to craft disciplinary argument. This developmental learning is facilitated by the writing fellow tutors who work in a team with the lecturers to give continuous feedback. At Wits now, this program is quite large. We have 40 courses in all faculties, across all faculties, with over 300 writing fellow tutors supporting the lecturers. We also have the writing board of the faculties, which is a cross-faculty group of academics who recognize new submissions, provide oversight, and also are part of this opportunity for discussing teaching across completely disciplinary backgrounds. Also, as part of this writing program, as part of this ecology, we have the writing centers, a writing library, and writing of faculty academies within each faculty. We've got Marika here, so she's one of the writing faculty academy people. All writing intensive courses, and you can see how they can apply to very different disciplines, and what we're trying to do, which is to activate students, to engage them. All writing intensive courses aim to these following things: to get students to pose worthwhile questions, to evaluate arguments, to give and receive constructive criticism, develop increasingly scholarly responses, and I've got this in purple because I think that's relevant to the letter writing, consider purpose and audience, distinguish among fact, inference, and opinion, navigate, construct, and validate online knowledge, particularly important now, articulate complex ideas clearly, deal with problems that have no simple solutions, reflect on learning to build upon it, understand how different disciplines present and define themselves, become informed, independent thinkers. This approach is relevant now because of the erosion of deep literacy as described by Adam Garfinkel. By being constantly online, there's this danger of continuous partial attention and the loss of the ability to concentrate, to gain that wonderful fusion between writer and reader in the act of writing and reading. And this is a global problem. It's a problem even among rich countries. The OECD recent report, and those 36 countries are rich, points out that only 9% of 15-year-olds can distinguish between fact and opinion. And of course, writing intensive courses specifically are looking at that gap in critical thinking. The Wellcome Trust research report looking at health education made writing intensive courses its #1 recommendation. Similarly, at the Association of African Universities General Assembly that's just happened, the outgoing Vice Chancellor of the American University Nairobi recommended writing intensive courses as a key to developing education in Africa. The letters are in relation to that quest to develop scholarly responses. We started it in March 2020 in the Writing Center. Letters give you a heightened awareness of who is writing to whom and why. It heightens that rhetorical frame. It provides the opportunity for naming your thinking and thinking about your thinking, to use informal writing to craft formal writing. We develop templates so that the student can identify their concerns and their beginning point, and the respondents can respond firstly to higher order concerns, questions of argument, before going to strategic questions of language. And So we are delighted with this project and grateful to the Oppenheimer Memorial Trust and grateful to Professor Erasmus and Dr. Mngomezulu in Wits Anthropology Department for initiating this project, because it also helps us to develop writing in intensive networks and to have this webinar, which includes the extension of this work to Northwest University and to Stellenbosch. So now I would like to introduce my colleague, Professor Zimitri Erasmus, and I would like to mention that in a recent interview for a writing intensive consultant, one tutor described that a breakthrough in his writing was this letter writing method, which he'd experienced in a course run by Professor Erasmus. He said that he found this attention through letters from his professor at first uncomfortable, but as the correspondence developed, he became both more aware, more specific, and more confident about his thoughts, especially when Zimitri made him aware of what he'd said earlier. This was his breakthrough in his writing, to enabled him to understand where he came from and where he was going in his thinking. So over to you, Zimitri.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Pamela. Pamela conveniently erased herself from thinking this project. So just to give you a sense of the genesis of what we call the Epistolary Pedagogy project. The project emerged from a convergence over time of several relationships and processes. Thank you, Leyya. Thank you. So, yeah, the project emerged from a convergence over time of several relationships and processes. One of the processes is my personal letter writing. The other is my love of books based on scholars' letters as examples of thought and theory imbued with feeling. And Nosipho kindly invited me to Friday afternoon discussions, I think they were once a month, about what it means to teach at a university in South Africa today and amidst this pandemic. And these discussions were we had with colleagues from Northwest University, some of whom are with us today, colleagues from UCT, and from the University of Pretoria. And then these discussions, these Friday afternoon discussions, informed Nosipho and my emergency remote teaching and learning plan for the anthropology department, and we wrote that in April 2020. Then the other process that is significant to the emergence of the project is Pamela's introduction of letter writing when writing intensive courses shifted online. What I did is I shared Nosipho and my emergency remote teaching and learning plan with Jonathan Jansen, who encouraged us to write a proposal for OMT funding. And the OMT proposal, the Oppenheimer Memorial Trust proposal, is premised on that anthropology plan, on the shift online of writing intensive courses, and also on Pamela Nichols' idea of taking the project beyond Wits. So that part of it, you know, as well as, well, I mean, Nosipho, myself, and Pamela wrote the proposal together. The other, you know, relationship and process that, you know, converges here is my long productive relationship with academic development and curriculum development staff at UCT, where I taught for 16.5 years before I moved to Wits. And then at Wits, since 2012, Pamela and the Wits Writing Center provided continuity for me of this kind of relationship to thinking about how we learn and teach as conditions change. And so I am really grateful to, to these relationships, to this network, to Pamela, to the Wits Writing Center, because these are all, the relationships and processes that I could fall back on with colleagues when the COVID-19 catastrophe struck us. Thank you.
Thank you, Zimitri, for that introduction to this project. Now we move to Dr. Mngomezulu and Leyya Hoosen from Wits Anthropology. It's very nice the way that Leyya in particular has moved from being a student to a writing fellow to a freshly invented role of senior writing fellow who co-presents this course and I think runs craft cafes, which connect student journal writing with ideas from the course. So I hand over to Nosipho and Leyya to explain further.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Zimitri, and hi, everyone. For today, I will be presenting on our EP work for 2 courses. So today it'll be just me speaking, but Leyya is here and I'm excited for her to join us when we have our discussions. Leyya, if you could move to the next slide for me, please. So I was thinking about what the letter, what the role of the letter has been for my different courses this semester, because I've employed it in both my undergraduate and postgraduate courses. So in the undergraduate courses, it largely was, well, firstly, it was a tool for me to allow me to connect with students. So it was a connecting tool through my weekly letters, which I'd like to show you as I continue with this presentation. So every week I would write letters to the students in the course and just try and mitigate some of the isolation and distance of working online. The second objective was using the letter as a teaching tool. So students often had letter writing assignments as part of a core delivery of the course content. And an example of this was one of the summative assessment that they did, which was a letter to Sarah Batman. And then the third was in the undergraduate course, using the letter as a writing tool. So the students also practicing their writing through their writing intensive their consultations with writing fellows. And often these were around reflecting on their drafts and reflecting on their own writing practices. And then in the postgraduate courses, it was largely through the morning pages. So students would write letters to themselves, for themselves, and about 3 pages every morning to think about their research process. The second was through the Craft Cafe reflections, which Leyya facilitated every Friday with the students. And so they would take their morning pages, discern what was important from that, and then they would write letters to Leyya and use them in their conversations during the Friday Craft Cafes. And then lastly, as a research methodology, where I found that the student that I am supervising really took to this letter writing modality and is now a central part of her own honors research writing practice, where she is responding to letters from Robert Sobukwe, and her participants are also doing the same, which has also proved to be a really interesting way of thinking about doing anthropological fieldwork during COVID. And lastly, with the undergraduates and postgraduates, both rather, is they all had to do portfolio reflections at the end of the course, which was a really key part of emphasizing their cumulative learning. And so taking all what they've done over 14 weeks to put together a portfolio and then write a cover letter thinking about what this practice and process has meant for them. And so I entitled this presentation today as Locating Intellectual Worlds. And in that, I was thinking about what kind of texts are we building here with these letters. We've got our conversations over tutorials on Ulwazi, which are lots of quick text conversations. There were emails that students would send to me about concerns, and tutors actually primarily concerns they were having in facilitating this epistolary pedagogy in the tutorials. We've got social media where a lot of students are engaging with each other online. We've got academic texts that they're reading for the course. We've got these writing intensive essay drafts and draft letters. And all of these texts, all of these letters, I'm really interested in asking what kind of texts we are building, what kind of registers become important in this context, and what kind of audience or audiences do we imagine when we engage in this process of letter writing. And so that is the overarching question in the back of my mind as I think through some of the experiences. Oh my goodness, it's already 3 minutes. Okay, and next slide, Leyya.
It's fine, don't worry, keep going.
So let's move to the next slide. So, you know, my students and myself are termed in the anthropological literature as digital natives. So we are a generation who have grown up with the internet, with the online world as an integral part of our understanding of reality. And when you look at like the history of epistolary novels or just its use in ethnographic writing, it's come from, you know, 2 centuries ago, where one would physically receive a letter and one might be excited by the tangibility and the tactileness and also the ongoing correspondence about your everyday life. And so I've been thinking about, what does this letter form mean when we do it over email, when we do it digitally? And here are some of the key takeaways that I've been kind of reflecting on in our process of working with this epistolary pedagogy. The first is about academic poetics and encouraging students to understand themselves as participating in a conversation. So a lot of my experience with especially undergraduate students and also with postgraduate students is that they find that they are being inducted into this academy, which is this large amorphous kind of scary thing, and their voices get lost and they're not quite sure what exactly their place in this should be. And so a huge part of my facilitation of these courses is to introduce them to the moves anthropologists make, to understand that the way in which we speak in our particular discipline is guided by particular kinds of rules, but it is not the only way in which one can speak. And especially in engaging with questions around language, code switching, and the fact that students use just so many different kinds of texts in their everyday lives, from voice notes to memes. So how they understand themselves as entering into a conversation, often a conversation that had been happening for hundreds of years before they were born, and suddenly they're placed in conversation with these scholars, and to give them a sense of confidence, I guess, of understanding that they say, but also I too say. And a huge part of the epistolary pedagogy has been about iterative learning. And so inviting students to acknowledge that they too have prior learning, that there's a huge amount of knowledge that they have from their lived experiences, and how to bring that into how they think about these conversations that they are entering into. And what does it mean to talk to strangers, right? Like, what does it mean to be in conversation with Paul Stoller or Bell Hooks, who they might not know personally? I don't know personally, but how do they think about their voice, their audience, and position themselves in this conversation? And I mean, one poignant example that comes to mind is thinking about writing to Sarah Baartman, who is no longer alive. What does it mean to be in conversation with her, and what kind of audience are we creating when we write these particular kinds of letters? Another huge part of the epistolary pedagogy has been about helping students become conscious about who taught them how to read, how they have learned how to interpret the world and discern what the world means to them. Through a lot of their learnings, even in high school, undergraduate, postgraduate, is to pay attention to how they've come, oh my goodness. Okay, that is my time. Okay, I'm just going to highlight. So these are just some of the key kind of takeaways. So thinking about who taught you how to read, thinking about iteration, thinking about affect, which is a huge part of the letter writing process, because the I is important, how they feel, where they are situated right now, and thinking about the tangibility of this process while we are engaging online, which feels very abstracted and very far away. And thinking also about how to incorporate frustrations and challenges as invitations for them to stay with the trouble. And the question I posed here is, why are you so pressed? Because a lot of the time I would code switch in our discussions in class to let students know that they already have some of the language to discuss and interpret what they're experiencing in this course, but to now bring it to the fore in a particularly kind of disciplinary context. And I hopefully will get a chance to talk about scholarship as practice, which I think I won't really have time for. But Leyya, if you could just swing to slide 6 in the last minute. So I won't go into all the context of these courses. Wow, 7 minutes really does fly. And so this is just one particular example of a letter from a student who was discussing their experience with engaging with the writing intensive course and this epistolary pedagogy. And this is drawn from their reflection letters for their portfolios. And I've highlighted in yellow here some of the key things that I thought were really interesting from this one particular student's reflections. Firstly, you know, a student kind of being vulnerable and clear about like not being quite sure what anthropology was, and they're also foregrounding how it was so helpful to have the constant communication from not only the department, I mean, not only me as the lecturer, but also from their tutors, but also from the department as a whole. So checking in on their mental health and making sure that there is a human connection during remote learning and taking their mental health very seriously and the effects of isolation quite seriously. And as you see in the letter, the student also highlights some things about, you know, the emails and tutorials from the department, and you know, one of the big takeaways from this letter that I thought was quite insightful was when they say, I was always taught and used to writing from an objective perspective and never to use I in academic essay because my opinion did not matter. I simply had to paraphrase the words of others and write other authors' opinions in my own words. And then they later go on to discuss in the letter, which I haven't included all of it here, is how they find the I in the writing and being confident in that voice. And just a cheeky another example, Leyya, if you could go to the next slide, and then I'll stop there. Another student also highlighted that, you know, they were always afraid to get started on the assignments, the kinds of pressures that they're feeling, but also feeling the huge confidence boost when their tutor would respond and compliment them on their own writing tone in their assignments, because, you know, they say that their writing has been labeled as pessimistic or sarcastic when they put it through the Grammarly app. And so it was really great to be able to see students shift in recognizing that their own positionality, their own thoughts and insights are important in the conversation that they're entering into, and how epistolary pedagogy allows us to foreground some of those things. But I am so sorry that I am out of time, but I'm hoping that in the question and answer session, we'll be able to actually engage with some of these things and maybe talk about my own letter, which, wow, 7 minutes really does fly. So that is me.
Yeah, fascinating. Right.
Sorry, that was like so fast. I thought I had so much time, and like, oh, 7 minutes was gone. And also just to highlight just the amazing relationship that Leyya and I were able to build through this process of working with a student who has been a student in my postgraduate writing intensive courses, later on as a tutor in second year, becoming a teaching assistant, and even facilitating herself the writing intensive programs for the postgrads, and her insights have been invaluable in shaping how we design this course. So thank you.
Fabulous. Now to Zimitri.
Okay. Yeah, and you know, Nosipho's work, Leyya's work, and Pamela's work have been invaluable to, you know, my practice and my thinking. So, yeah, and this is what makes this whole project, you know, tick. So, Leyya, if you could go to my slide where I talk about the course, that would be really wonderful. That one, yes, thank you. Okay, so this is the course I'm going to talk about today. It's called Race and What It Means to Be Human. And aligned with the anthropology department's work towards decolonizing the curriculum, this course is intellectually, politically, and theoretically structured around 3 pillars. One pillar is 2 significant recent events in everyday life: the murder of Colin Scorsa and George Floyd in 2020, and media representations of the July unrest after Zuma's imprisonment in 2021. So that's the one pillar. The second pillar is, it is about getting students at 3rd year level to read a primary theoretical text by Sylvia Wynter. And I give the title of the text is on the slide. And then the third pillar is weaving together these everyday life events and this primary text to illustrate the need to move beyond the mantra-like conception, race is a social construct, towards understanding what it means to conceptualize race as a set of articulated political relations, articulated with Eurocentric conceptions of what it means to be human, articulated with class, articulated with party political affiliations, and so on. So that very, very broadly is the course. And this is what its weeks look like. In week 1, we meet, greet, and write with the 6-week exercise. Week 2, the 6 words exercise. And in week 2, that exercise gets deepened. Week 3, the curriculum is everything. That's the theme. And I work with extracts from the Pan-African literary and cultural magazine Chimurenga. And week 4, we focus on Sylvia Wynter's letter to her colleagues in 1992. It's called No Humans Involved. 5 and 6 are on the 2 concepts, race and tribe. And then from weeks 7 to 11, we read the primary text. It's a long text, it's a difficult text. It comes in 4 parts, and so we read 1 part each week, and then in week 5, look at the whole text, the text as a whole. And in week 12, we return to the 6-word exercise that we started with in week 1. So now, Leyya, if we can go to the letter as form. Yes, thank you. So, yeah, this connects to what Nosipho said in her presentation, but goes a little bit further back to 3000, 2000 BC, with the letter being the oldest and the most extensively used form of communication among humans. Its format over time has remained generally the same: greetings, content, and endings. And then there are a whole range of designs in which the letter comes, those hallmark cards at CNA being, one such design. There is literature on letter writing as a social practice. What Baseman, tells us is that the letter was invented to mediate distance, which connects to the pandemic and learning and teaching in the context of a pandemic. And also letters were invented to provide a transactional space among humans. The letter is a cultural artifact embedded in power relations. And other genres began as letters. Scientific journals began as letters. Money began as letters. Novels began as letters. And David Scott refers to the letter as the literary embodiment of friendship. And also linked to Nosipho's presentation, you know, the Sarah Bartman letter and her honor students' idea of responding to Sobukwe's letters. David Scott, in fact, writes an entire book to Stuart Hall after Stuart's passing. So it's a very, very, very beautiful text. And then, as Nosipho mentioned, letters have a very special place in anthropology through, you know, the way in which the ethnographic or the field experience is communicated to family, to fellow colleagues, to students, and so on. And then Razor, who worked in the context of university learning on the south side of Chicago, she writes about letter writing in a classroom as quote unquote care in action. So that in general is sort of the, you know, the conception of the letter as form. And in a little bit, I'll be going to how this form sort of works in this particular course. Now, who writes to whom in race and what it means to be human? I write an introductory letter to the class, and that letter appears on the Ulwazi site weeks before, you know, the course is actually uploaded. And I write a weekly letter. Ah, wow, is that me?
Yes.
Oh,
it is.
Okay.
But keep going.
Okay.
But please keep going.
Yes.
Okay. So who writes to whom, right? I write the introductory letter. I write a weekly letter. Students write to writing fellows write to students. And this is the written conversation that creates what Liz Stanley calls the epistolarium of the course. And then to slide 4, please, Leyya. Yeah. So long form letters is the pandemic pedagogical form in the course, both in 2020 and in 2021, for these reasons. And I'm going to show you the first and the last exercise that I work with in the course. Thanks, Leyya, to writing exercise 1. Okay, so this is the writing exercise that I've designed, and you can see, so we start the course with this exercise and we end the course with the exercise. And so students are asked to write a 6-word memoir of their experience of race and a 6-word memoir of their experience of what it means to be human. I give them a rationale for the exercise, and I give them an example of something I did during COVID-19, and I talked to them a little bit about the process. And so there are 8 writing exercises that are cumulative over the 14-week course. Students draft and redraft, they read and reread, and like in Nosipho's class, which is something I learned from Nosipho, is they produce a portfolio at the end of the course. And what I think I will do now is go to the last slide, which is why does writing exercise 1 work? There we are. This is the kind of feedback that I get from students. If we can go to the previous slide, please, Leyya. Thanks. Yeah. So what students say is to the next one. Thanks, Leyya. Why does writing exercise 1 work? And then there's bullet points. Okay, there we are. So these are the kinds of things students say. I didn't have to think too much. And others say, doing this exercise has made me think more deeply. So here we see the, the practice of writing as thinking in motion, in a sense. And then also the exercise 1, they say that it brought them to realize that their experience can help them unpack social science concepts. And so this actually gives us, gives the students a sense of what situated knowledge actually means. The exercise animates theory, makes theory have meaning for students, which is part of the process of decolonizing the curriculum. Students say that it makes them feel like they are and like they can write poetry. And here we have the idea of knowledge imbued with feeling. And writing exercise 1, they say, gives them a sense of freedom from other authors' ideas. So cultivating independent thought, not rote learning of secondary schooling. This exercise also elicits an awareness of history among students. You see that coming through their response to the exercise. And students say that the exercise made them sound more like me, which is about voice. And already in the first week, the first and the second week, you can see students knowing about the articulation of race and class. And that becomes a concept that is introduced later, but already revealed in writing exercise 1. So we can build on this to help them understand what we mean when we say that race is a set of articulated political relations. And then one student, and I'm going to end here, one student reflected and said this: had I done writing exercise 1 now, this was at the end of the course, she says, my 6 words would have been very different. And so I incorporated her response into the course this year by having it as one of the last writing exercises. And this is an indication on the part of this student of a shift in perspective because of the course. And I'll end there. And thank you, Leyya.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Zimitri. So now we move to the University of the Northwest. And I'm very grateful to these colleagues for taking up the opportunity to join this project at a difficult time and without previous experience of working with writing intensive courses. Their other challenges are that they're working across 3 institutions, 3 campuses at Mahikeng, one at Mahikeng, Vanderbijl Park, and at Potch. Dr. Auerbach is teaching in anthropology and Dr. Holdridge in history. And over to you, Chris and Jess.
Yes, I'm just checking, can everyone see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes, we can, Chris.
Was that a yes?
Yes, that's from me.
Wonderful, great. So I'm going to try and keep an eye on the clock as well. Right, countdowns. So Northwest University is quite unusual in that it's 3 campuses, quite spread apart. One in the province of Gauteng, around about an hour south of Johannesburg in Vanderbijl Park. The largest campus is at Potchefstroom, about an hour and a half northwest of Johannesburg, and then the 3rd campus in Mahikeng, which is about 3.5 hours west of Johannesburg. So even before COVID, there had been elements of remote connection and teaching, whether administratively between staff members in the various campuses or even between students. So one interesting product or result of COVID-19 has been increased interaction between the different campuses. Social anthropology has just expanded from 1 campus to 2 of those 3 campuses, but history, which I'm involved in terms of teaching and research, has a presence in all 3 campuses. So we've been involved in terms of having combined classes and means of interaction since last year, using our learning management system and other means of teaching. So just to give you an idea of the various locations of the campuses there. Now, one of the interesting aspects around the history of the Northwest University is, and this perhaps comes to our positionality as lecturers. I'm sure Jess will be talking specifically also about letter writing, and I'll be talking about that as well. So it builds upon Witz's the very, very fascinating and very innovative approaches they're employing there. My own background is at the University of Cape Town and the University of Sydney, and I'm fairly recently joined Northwest University. Jess also has a background at the University of Cape Town and then Oxford and then Stanford. So unlike those institutions I've mentioned, Northwest University does not have an integrated tutorial program in the same sort of sense of small groups and critical thinking as part of its institutional culture and history. One of the exciting ongoing conversations within Northwest University as a whole is moving beyond some of the relics and traces of fundamental pedagogy, which were very much part of South Africa's higher education and even basic and high school education systems going back through into apartheid. So almost the opposite in many ways of the epistemic pedagogy and the social constructivist approach of involving students in their own learning. So in some ways within our curriculum design, it's a process of unlearning for students. One of the most common responses I get from students, even at third year with the module or the course that I taught in the first semester, is please correct me, or what is the right answer? And one aspect here with the letter writing has been a means to try and undo that immediate response to fundamental pedagogy. It might be from some of their other courses that they're doing in their undergraduate, but even stem back to their school careers where their teachers might have inculcated a particular form where the students need to learn the right answer. So one thing we found particularly useful with the letter writing is it returns students to their own positionality. And what I did with the third year project is we had 3 writing fellows, one from each of the campuses of the university, Kiobako Cholo, Njubulo Mthembu, and Sine Kleinhans. Now, we used a Gmail account for the correspondence, and there were letters via email. One of the important uses of this method, rather than others, is it was asynchronous and low data, and almost going back to an analog, old-fashioned approach of letter writing. This suited students' own technological challenges. Many found that they could only turn to their writing because of finding a quiet space to work or think often has meant that many of our students choose to work later at night or early in the morning. And it ensured that there was as much involvement with them rather than sometimes live connectivity did not work to their schedules or the data intensive needs that they face or realities that they've faced. So one of the things that came across quite interestingly, and I think this is perhaps the dialogue between social anthropology and history here, one of the classic sort of approaches within history is to write in the third person rather than the first person. And this can often feed into this idea of having a particular right answer. Writing a history as a series of events, something which is an account of and then, and the subjectivity at times can be frowned upon. So this has made me rethink in many ways the ways to include the student voices more clearly. So I think when reflecting back on the module, there's some aspects in terms of assignments which were more summary based, with students reflecting via the letters on the way they write that. And I think there are ways which I'm thinking more broadly within the curriculum here at Northwest University in history of moving beyond that. Already in the current module I'm teaching at first year, I'm encouraging students with a module now on world history to think around how knowledges are constructed through the imagined reader and the position of where the writer is. So a lot of the writing that they're reading, a lot of the readings that they are doing and responding to have been written from the global north, written for imagined students even sitting in classrooms in New York and London and not in Johannesburg, Mafeking, New Delhi, or Jakarta or anywhere else in the global south. So by returning to the students' own positions as knowledge producers or challenging the actual imagined audiences of what they are reading and responding to, I think there's a lot of very positive ways in which we can undo the fundamental pedagogies of responding to a correct answer and then including students in that writing and challenging of knowledge. And letter writing is certainly a social activity, but I certainly want to defend, at least hopefully post-COVID, the importance of embodied presence also in reaffirming and allowing for social interaction. But letter writing, I think, is very, very useful in ensuring a means of including student voices here. I'll hand over to Jess.
Cool, thanks so much, Chris. Yeah, so I'm just going to use this one slide in my presentation, and it really builds a lot on what Chris has shared, just in terms of the dynamics of the institution. And there's been a little bit of comments in the chat about how Northwest has its own particular history that does make it sometimes like it's a place where this kind of project would have been inconceivable 10 years ago. And I really, acknowledge how much the institution has changed with the work, especially of so many people, to just start opening it into this kind of into a place where this is possible. And so the invitation was really gratefully and graciously received by all of us, because it has allowed us to kind of demonstrate a proof of concept that I think many of us knew was possible, but hasn't really been done at this institution before. And so it's been incredibly rich. And I also, just before I begin, want to acknowledge the two writing fellows from the course that I was facilitating, Kanye Mayedwa and Lawrence Luke, who are both here. And I think their presence sort of also demonstrates the impact of this kind of pedagogy and of this approach on students, who I think for Kanye and Lawrence, and they're welcome to jump in if they'd like, this has been quite a transformative experience as well. And so what we did with anthropology is we used the writing intensive model for our third year class where students were preparing for honors. And we also took some of the materials that had been shared, particularly the templates for writing, and introduced them at the same time to second years. And we're now working with them with our first year classes as well. So even though those courses are not officially writing intensive courses, they've been incredibly enriched by the use of writing material, writing intensive methodologies. What I noticed is just in the second year course last semester is just simply using a template that helps students look at each reading and say, this is what I learned and this is what I took from it and these are my questions. Had a transformative effect on this students' engagement with texts. Firstly, in terms of content and in terms of accountability, but especially in terms of the ability of students to learn from their peers. And so we had it on our LMS in an open space so that students could read one another's work. And we simply gave them a kind of a set of comments with an indication of a mark from 1 to 5. And they weren't being marked for every piece, because there was a complicated marking system that enabled them to get a kind of aggregate, but also show growth and demonstrate how they were changing. And in the portfolios that they wrote, and again, this came from the writing intensive suggestion that now all of our courses in anthropology are including portfolios. Almost every single student said that ability to learn from their peers and finally see, what am I doing wrong? What, or if not wrong, what's the difference between a piece of writing that kind of scrapes me through the course and a piece of writing that makes an original contribution or gives a different perspective. And the points that have been raised in the chat about what's the difference between an argument and a perspective, and how do we know what we know. And it was incredible to see the second years who weren't having any individualized focus per se, finding themselves transforming their own writing, whilst at the same time we had Kanye and Lawrence working very, very closely with our third year class. And we have a small third year class, and so each of them had a tiny group of students who they really came to know very intimately through this process of writing intensive pedagogy. And I think the big thing that has struck me is that my understanding of who our honors students are going to be next year is very, very different from what it would have been without this kind of intervention. So typically we tend to get 3 or 4 white middle class students in our honors class because they're the students who can afford to continue, who maybe have some sense of the parents who want them to do at least a 4-year degree. Whereas I think that next year we're going to have a very different demographic in our classroom. And that's largely thanks to the relational work that Kanye and Lawrence put in kind of unpacking this secretive box of what is postgrad life like, what does it mean to do research. And so we incorporated many of the insights that Kanye and Lawrence were gaining at the time through their own work, and they modeled a lot of the writing that needed to be done. And it was really beautiful to just see that, almost like it felt like the students suddenly had a big brother and a big sister who they could go to with all kinds of questions and get feedback that just allowed them to very slowly start opening up and really blossoming. And I think that was really profound for many of the students, and it allowed some students to pass who might not have passed, and it's allowed a lot of students, I think, to go into honors who wouldn't have otherwise done that. I think the other thing that for us was quite interesting was, and maybe it comes from my own, I have a scholarly interest in technologies of teaching and learning, I guess, and I'm quite enthusiastic about a lot of the tech, whilst also recognizing that it has huge implications and huge complexity to it. But I think that it can be quite powerful. And what we were able to do is integrate some of the writing intensive suggestions with students learning about the politics of technologies. How do these technologies work? Who owns the algorithms? How do they drive the ways in which knowledge is disseminated? And how does learning to write, for example, a letter, complement a practice of learning to write something that is searchable on Google? And just getting to students to do that kind of thinking and tacking between these different forms of technology. The letter as technology, Microsoft Teams as technology. What are the difference? How do we communicate differently and write differently in different ways? And we did a lot of reflection on the spaces of emojis, for example, and how the usages and communication that comes with emojis is so contextual and is generational and is symbolic, and that fits into the deeper questions of anthropology. I think the other thing that I really took from this was just seeing how much of an impact it had on the writing fellows. And of course, in our courses, we hadn't had the opportunity to see this before. I think we all intuited that it would happen, but there's been a remarkable development for our writing fellows in their own writing and in their own ability to work with feedback. And I think that's been really useful to see in the long term, and it makes me hope that this can become an expected experience rather than something that is that was somewhat experimental. And then the other thing is that for the first time, I really know that the students read, and that makes a difference. I think it's completely transformed. That's my 7 minutes. So it's completely transformed their experiences of reading and of interactions and dialogues with text. So thank you for this opportunity. It's been really thought-provoking, really rich. I hope that Kanye and Lawrence are adding things on the chat. I haven't been following it, but I'd like to invite them to explicitly if they haven't so far. And yeah, it's been a great and productive experience.
Wonderful. Many thanks, Jess and Chris. Lastly, we move to something completely different, to music, or maybe it's not, we'll find out, to music at the University of Stellenbosch. Again, these colleagues are new to WI teaching and learning, but they are connected to creative thinking around teaching and research, because I think all of them are connected to the Africa Open Institute. The invitation to join this project came quite late, so it was difficult for them to organize Writing Fellow postgraduate tutors. And Dr. Venter had the inspiration to suggest that rather than bringing in tutors, bringing in many tutors, some lecturers could act as Writing Fellows in their colleagues' class. I think this allowed for a particularly interesting reflections and insights into different roles, and shows how, as we're seeing in the chat as well, this pedagogy can make more power relations in a course lateral and dynamic. So let's move to, I think it will be Anke presenting first, and then Claudia, and then Esther, and lastly, Alene. Welcome to you very much.
Thank you, Pamela. Hi, my name is Anke. I was the writing fellow for a course entitled Musicological Criticism. This course was taught by lecturer Dr. Mark Runge, who's unfortunately not able to be with us here today. So I will just be shortly introducing you to the course, telling you what it's about, and then just reflecting on it as the writing fellow myself. So the course that Dr. Runge taught is really a course concerned with engaging music with critical theory or literary criticism. This is very often something that is completely new to music students who come to university or to the Stellenbosch University Music Department to learn to play an instrument and to really up their technical skills. So writing is often something that is neglected either by students themselves in pursuit of being a brilliant instrumentalist, which is admirable in itself, but it does present the challenge of teaching writing to students for us. So you can imagine that we opened we welcomed the invitation to this program with absolute open arms. It really seemed like a solution to us for teaching writing in relation to music. And when we started with this program, one of the greatest challenges was that we had to start it when we first, but when we were in the midst of remote learning online. So asking students, to write very often for the first time really seriously, and then send it to a writing fellow whom they do not know. Students were very uncomfortable with it. We struggled to get students to submit work. And what would often happen is that students would send me, the writing fellow, their very formal responses to a text, and then when they sent me the text, they would write me a very long email to me personally, the writing fellow, explaining all of their insecurities about what they've written. Can I please help them with this? That needs work. And that was an unexpected thing that happened, because now essentially as a writing fellow, I sit with two texts. I can engage with the students' formal work, responding to the article, text, chapter, or whatever was prescribed for that week, and also a letter addressed to myself, writing about the work that they just did. And it immediately sparked my imagination when we spoke earlier in this seminar about writing as I, and not in the third person, because I had these two contrasting ideas. And very often I say to students, this paragraph that you've written your email to me belongs in your formal response. It's the same thing. It has as much validity being in the email as it has being in the formal response. And I think the formal response format was really one of the limits of our course. I think this is something that we can do better in future. In future, when we do this again, we would like to incorporate more creative writing exercises. I am now in the position of being the lecturer for this course, and the first question that I got was, who's the writing fellow for the semester? And it was really tragic for me to convey to students that there is no writing fellow this semester, but we are going to continue this this process as much as we can, as much as we have capacity to do so. But I was so struck by students being so incredibly uncomfortable at the beginning of the writing fellow program to, in the first lecture for this semester, demanding, where's the writing fellow? So yeah, and then one thing that I think worked very well is we also did the portfolio approach, where students had the opportunity to revise their work from feedback that they've received, and we could see enormous development, enormous growth, finding voices. Yeah, altogether, I think it's a wonderful program, and I think the students requesting it back for me really was the most striking aspect of it. I now hand over to lecturer Dr. Claudia Jansen van Rensburg.
So, good afternoon, colleagues. It's actually Carina Venter here. Claudia is having internet problems. As it happens, the one day that one really needs that connection, it bombs. So I'm doubling as Claudia here. But as it happened, I did teach this course last year, and I'm currently teaching it, so I'm fairly familiar with the content. Right, so I quickly just want to introduce you to the course, and then Esther-Marie will reflect a little bit on the on her experiences as writing fellow for this course. So, research methodology is a module taught predominantly to honours and master's students in the Department of Music, and one of the challenges of this course is that in a class of probably 25 students, probably 90% of those students aren't necessarily interested in doing research. So we work in the music department in a typical conservatory setting where students, initially when they decide to study music, as I think most of us who did study music, you make that decision to study music with a view on becoming the next big headline performer. And then you discover along this journey ideas and questions, and some of us then begin to gravitate towards research. But very often a large majority of the class isn't necessarily they sort of have to do research, and they see it as something they have to do, but not necessarily as something that is part of where they want to go musically, right? And so one of the challenges in this course is actually to really entice students, to stimulate interest, and to get them towards research that veers away from the very traditional types of research that simply looks at a piece of music, tries to analyze it and try to say something about it, but so really to push towards a much more interdisciplinary kind of research, and in the process get students curious, or to stimulate curiosity and excitement about reading, writing and thinking through some of the questions that music opens up socially, politically and ethically. So the research methodology module in this sense is quite a weird animal. But so what we try to do in this module is to familiarize students with different modalities of research and the myriad ways in which research is conducted. Students are encouraged to think critically about the demands and axioms of the research economy. Some of the questions we pose and think through in this module include: who decides what counts as research, and what are the criteria governing these decisions? What are ordinarily the subjects and objects, in scare quotes, of research, and who stands to benefit from research? Should research be accorded any value, be that monetary, ethically, or humanitarian, or should research be pursued purely for the sake of acquiring knowledge? So some of the themes that we cover include ontology and epistemology, research ethics, indigenous methodologies, decolonizing research, interviews, life writing and biography. And then in the second semester, which doesn't really formally fall into the writing fellow or the writing intensive component, we build on these themes and think through authorship, the death of the author, ethnography, music analysis, music and race, several other themes that sort of play into the second semester. And then we also spend a lot of time on writing. So the final part of this module, the final 5 or 6 sessions, students actually bring some of their writing to class. and they have to respond to each other's writing. So the writing intensive component for this course was predominantly asking students to respond throughout on reading, so on articles, and to compile those responses into a portfolio. So it was sort of a cumulative learning exercise by which each week they had to write a response to a said reading, and all of that, those responses went into a portfolio that was then looked at towards the end of the semester by the lecturer, but throughout they also sent their responses to the writing fellow. So at this point, I will give over to Esther-Marie Pauw, who was the writing fellow for research methodology.
Thank you very much, Carina, for standing in at such short notice for Claudia and for Mark. I'd like to respond to the research methodology course by first of all emphasizing that the interdisciplinariness of the approaches that was used in this course was really magnificent. Students had to, as music students, cope with ethics, power, knowledge, decoloniality approaches, and you know, things that as Carina mentioned are often seen as, oh, that belongs to the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences building. It doesn't belong in the conservatory. And I think the level at which these students operate as masters and honors means that they've become open to more influences. But it really is a wonderful course to open windows into these areas. So the writing responses that had to be formulated every week on articles meant, again, as Jess said, that one could see whether they had struggled through the article, read it, and then the writing response always demanded some form of application of that particular methodology that was being discussed that week, and applying it to their own research projects, which is something running at the background of this whole year's research course. And so there was the significant space for opinion, for application, for trying things out, even if you have a hunch that this particular methodology doesn't quite suit or fit your topic as it could, then at least there are influences that you could gather. And then the creative thing that happens here is that you as a student can get feedback, first of all, in the class situation itself, where the lecturer is present, where you're reading a draft of your paper. You can also get feedback from the writing fellow. And then thirdly, you can take these ideas and go and work with your individual supervisor to try out more of these possibilities, knowing that not all of these methodologies apply to your project, but many of them would at least open windows for you. So I'd like to end by just saying, as a writing fellow, that the importance of windows for me was something that those who I could see grappled with the text in such a way, but they could also understand and manage it, one could open further windows and say, well, consider these other points of view as well in your writing for your final submission. And then those who struggled more and, you know, who basically just had to get to grips, those at that point, the writing fellow could on another level operate and support and say, yes, I can see you're thinking so much more clearly with this particular topic, and you know, as a clarity of thinking, logic, and then also for the students who understand more as a perspective and point of view agent, one begins to work between all the levels of where students stand. So that is my contribution as a writing fellow. I'm now going to hand over to Alene Holder, who is the writing fellow to the course that was titled Musicology and focused specifically on discussing aspects of Romanticism as a form of historical musicology. And this was to a class of about 31 students. And so Arlene was the writing fellow, and once she's done, I'll give you more information on the course itself because I was the lecturer. So thank you to Arlene.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alene Holder. Apologies for not putting my camera on. My connection is a bit unreliable. So as Dr. Pauw said, I was the reading fellow for musicology 212, second year musicology. I will just highlight some of the things I observed throughout my working with the students and their writing. I will just highlight a few things I noticed worked well and a few things that I think need to improve. On a very practical level, I observed that Dr. Pauw set several kinds of assignments, and they varied in length. And just very basically, I experienced that assignments that are slightly longer form, say 300 words and more, gave the students more opportunity to critically engage with the material, and they had enough space to build an argument in which I could help them in their thinking and their critical engagement, whereas shorter form assignments like 300 words and under would only give the students enough space to reflect on a bit of content or summarize a reading, and not critically engage on a bit of a higher level. So yes, just that on the length of assignments. Secondly, which is, I think, a unique aspect of this module that Dr. Pauw taught, is the approach to the content, the 19th century in music. The approach was sometimes via the instruments that the students played, and they had to reflect on the module content as a person playing that specific instrument. And the impact that this approach had on their writing was quite significant. I noticed that as soon as the students had the opportunity to draw on their knowledge of their instrument, which they have been working on for quite a while and which they are competent and confident in, as soon as they were able to draw on that knowledge as well as the content, their writing was a lot more confident and their thinking was clearer as well. Another observation, and Anke has also mentioned the challenge of encouraging students to submit their work frequently to the writing fellow. I have noticed that there's a significant difference in the improvement of the students who submitted frequently compared to the students who only submitted once in a while. Specifically because those students who submitted their work on a regular basis, I had the opportunity to get to know their writing style and strengths and weaknesses, and was then able to identify these things and point it out to them, and help them to also become aware of these patterns that I've been noticing in their writing, and then empower them to improve it in a way that can take their writing to a more advanced space. Yes, that's the sum total of my observations that I made in this course. Other observations or conclusions, things that worked, things that didn't, would just be reiterations of what my colleagues have mentioned already. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Pauw.
Thank you very much, Alene. So I'd like to very briefly, I know the time is running, very briefly just introduce you to some of the types of writings that I asked students to prepare. And these included, to my knowledge, a simulation of us as musicians who are also citizens who can write. So Pamela's phrase called writing citizenship inspired me to, for instance, ask them as one of several portfolio assignments to compile a biography of themselves, which would then require a certain register, because this would then be something that could be made public. I also asked them to compile a set of questions to a presenter at a conference on artistic research. I also asked them to do mind maps and WhatsApp dialogues transcribed or even copied and pasted as such on topics in the course. I asked them to do bulleted list of main points in an article, asked them to write a letter to an editor, teacher, but almost as a role play, because they were now situated as a consumer of reading the newspaper in the 19th century. So it was a bit of role play. I asked them to write a newspaper report on a student debate that they had in class on Romanticism. And then the three longer essays, I asked them to think very carefully about their practice, their instruments, and to think through their instruments into Romanticism and from Romanticism into their instruments. So as Alene mentioned, then determine their own problems and research projects that they wanted to know more about, and not wait for me to give them topics to research on. So a cellist would be considering cellist repertoire or cellist techniques or cellist problems and tensions of relating Romanticist ideals to present day performance practice, etc. And then the final essay was the one that I really hoped would shift these conventional spheres of only focusing on practice in a conservative way, to shift them into thinking about curating, where curating allows us to, on the one hand, be preservative curators. Then you're thinking about how museum practices are conserving, for instance, 19th century formats of singing 19th century leader, but then also turn to interventionist curating and considering how can today's performance practices destabilize, intervene notions which carry on from the 19th century and which in a sense can still cause a form of harm today. So my hunch here is that, if I could just end with this, that there's an extremely difficult thing that's going on with conservatory music practice, especially where it's focused pretty heavily, like at Stellenbosch, on Western music making. And so the thing here is that if these students are involved as a body, an embodied practical involvement in Western Romanticist music, veers towards preservative concertizing, right? Just doing the right thing within the right context, having the right concert manners, getting it right, skill, correctness, and maybe focusing on things like conviction and expression. But then these energies dilute away from being contextually aware, asking questions like, what is the significance of me playing Schubert in Stellenbosch in the 21st century in this conservatoire building, or maybe taking it out into the streets if I still do the same repertoire? How can I adapt things? How can I change things to maybe think more into the flows and the fluxes of decolonial practices, of understanding that there are more options than just what I've been taught with for all these years with my instrument? So I hope that the curating essay would at least open them to matrices of harm, but also options of opening things up. And that's all then from me. Thank you very much.
Gosh, incredibly interesting presentations. Now handing over to Nosipho for the last bit of any questions and answers.
Yeah, to echo your sentiments, Pam, and just looking at all the amazing conversations in the chat, such rich and beautiful exercises, ideas, and deep thinking around epistolary pedagogy. So I will just be moderating the Q&A. So if you could maybe raise your hand, or maybe just unmute your mic if you'd like to speak, because I can't see everyone's face here. But if anyone would like to pick up on anything from the chats, because I agree, this is very inspiring. It is super incredible. Any questions? Is there someone with a shy hand that I'm not seeing? Let me close the chat and see if I can see everyone's name. Is there
Colette has her hand up.
Oh, please go ahead, Colette. Sorry, I can't see. Please go ahead.
Hey, it wasn't that you hadn't seen it. It's actually when you said, "Are there any shy hands?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I can put my hand up."
Okay, brilliant.
So this might be a bit off topic, but I found this so inspiring and exciting and interesting. And I've noticed a weird thing with postgraduate students and supervision, actually, which is that students have a very odd relationship to letters and to feedback, where I will ask direct questions to a student and they will say, thank you so much for that feedback, and essentially do the performative stuff of letter writing. And then I'll write again, I'll say, yeah, cool, but this is actually a conversation, so could you maybe answer that question? And they dodge direct questions. And I think maybe this is a way of shifting that early on so that students actually learn a kind of a literacy with letters, because I'm seeing it as lacking in the students that I'm supervising. Responding to drafts is one way to do that, to make students, actually respond to comments on work early on in undergrad, and maybe letters are the other thing.
Definitely. And to encourage this idea that this is a conversation, this is not just you did this and you get the right answer, the wrong answer, but to inculcate that culture of conversation in our scholarly practice with our students.
We've also got Bontle's hand up.
I see Bontle, yes. I was about to.
Sorry. Hi, everyone, and thank you. Maybe I'll comment on what Coletta said, and then I'll pose my question. I think what has been posed is also something I've been seeing around. I think a growing person, I think what you refer to, Colette, is this growing or awareness of personhood and relatability. And I think letter writing is something that has fostered that as well. And I think the pandemic as well has created this awareness of persons behind the roles or the positions that people might hold. So that's just a reflection that I'll share. And the question I had, Nosipho, maybe it might be for you, because I think Zimitri said you introduced her to the use of portfolios. I was curious, how have you used that? And yeah, what expression does it have in your discipline? I'm curious to find out and relate that to how I've been using them.
Okay, cool. No, thank you. That's a great question, Bontle. Maybe I could just respond directly to that. So I started using portfolios, I think about 3, maybe 4 years ago. And it came as just a pragmatic solution to the problem of students, missing work, emailing work, not submitting on the learning platform. And so it was a way of collating the work. But as we developed over the years, it's really become such a central way for students themselves to be attentive to their own learning practice. So to not see each assignment as this like isolated instance, but to be able to look across the 14 weeks and being like, oh, like I think you noticed in Zimitri's presentation where a student was like, oh, if I had to do this assignment now, this is how I would think about it. And so to really encourage students to reflect on their learning practice and that their learning is theirs, and they are able to also give feedback on, no, this wasn't really clear, I got lost here. And the writing fellow letters really inculcate that. So by the time they get to the portfolio, it's something that they've been doing over the course of the 14 weeks to reflect on their own learning practice. And as I mentioned, this talk, I titled it Locating Intellectual Worlds, to kind of locate themselves as being part of these conversations and being part of their own learning.
With you, thank you.
Sure. And I'd love to hear also from you about like how you have used portfolios before I see your hand, Karabo.
Sure. I think I've used it similarly. A showcase of your learning process. And I love that in terms of this idea of locality, that they locating themselves and ownership of their learning process as well. I think I can really resonate with what you've shared. I've been using it the same way. I don't think I can add more. I think the nuances would be in the detail and how that has been scaffolded and the whole process. But I liked how you also prefaced that with, it's also showing them that these little bits that we're doing, this is the big picture that it's mapping onto. And I think also as I'm reflecting on it as I speak, that maybe what my map might have looked like, how that might reflect against their own map of their learning journey. So yeah, I'm just reflecting on that now. Thanks, Nosipho.
Sure. And I love the idea of us also mapping our own processes, because we are learning, right?
Absolutely.
And to place those in conversations, because I mean, my letter that I didn't get a chance to show was a lot of like the gnashing of teeth and the grappling with some of like the sticky areas, especially when we're writing to Sarah Batman in the 21st century, coming from diverse positions. It's but I don't want to talk too much about that. Karabo, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And this is really powerful. Thank you for these presentations. Mine is, it's a comment and a question. It's kind of asking for guidance, right? I'm doing my master's by research, which means I don't have any coursework. And I think considering, the kind of isolation under which we're working and the challenges in kind of forming writing groups with your own cohort, because people have so many demands on their time, how would it be useful to kind of create one's own kind of curriculum, as because we have these deadlines that that are difficult to meet, but designing one's own curriculum in this kind of fashion, where you set aside a week to do this thing, whatever it's got to do with your research, so that you keep that writing practice going. Because I find that a lot of us end up sort of running away into reading journal article after journal article and really struggling to write. And we know that supervisors are not going to hold your hand along that. You have to actually sort of take the initiative yourself. So I'm wondering if it would be useful to prepare some kind of program or template that we can make available to particularly MA and PhD students who have to kind of create, work out their own schedule and their own strategy as to how they're going to work through their projects. Thanks.
That is such an interesting question, Karabo. I wonder if Zimitri, I don't know if you have a direct response or a different question, but I'd also like to open up to other presenters from Northwest, Stellenbosch, and Wits to also respond. I think this is a really important question to think about. What about our MA students who are doing dissertations, and how epistolary pedagogy could shape that? So Zimitri, if you might jump in, and I see your hand, Avril, after Zimitri.
Yeah, thanks, Nosipho. I just wanted to respond directly. I mean, one of the things that I think is very useful as a supervisor, but also as an MA student, is if one reads a set of 5 articles and then you write about those articles in relation to the proposal that you wrote a few months ago. That, for me, helps keeping the conversation with yourself alive, but it also helps me as a supervisor to know where you're at in your head with your thinking. I think that way of breaking work up into smaller bits and pieces and writing about those bits and pieces can be very useful. Thank you.
No, thank you, Z. I wonder if anyone else would like to respond. And I don't know if Avril, you want to jump in.
I did actually, Nosipho, because it's something that is a core part of my work, is supervising MA students. And I think the question that's been posed is such an important one, especially when it's by research, by dissertation, and there isn't that structure of going through the literature and so on. So what I find useful is, like Zimitri suggested, is actually look at the key authors you want to engage with, and in fact write a letter back to the authors to say, in your article, in relation to my research, what was most useful for me was this. I wish you had also thought about that, because that made me think about. So you're almost having a dialogue with the authors. So it could be like a reading response to either one paper or a few papers, as Zimitri was saying. The other thing is to write a letter to the supervisor to say, in my work in the last 2 weeks, I've been reading the following texts, and it's made me think differently about the question that I'm posing. I'm now thinking I need to structure it differently or focus it in this way. And so that you can actually encourage, from a supervising point of view with your student, to say, write me a letter every 2 weeks. You're clearly not going to have text, new chapters to give me, but write me a letter, tell me where you're at. What are you thinking about? What's changing your thinking? What's helping you think differently? What are you working on? And maybe we can use these idea of letters, which I'm so fascinated from this presentation, in the supervision more formally.
Definitely. And I've just dropped a book that maybe others might find useful. I just dropped a title of a book for Karabo in relation to what you've just raised, Avril, about letter writing to supervisors. And this book is put together as emails between a PhD student and their supervisor as they're in the field, as they're reading, as they're grappling through all the complexities. And it's a text I prescribed to my postgraduate students as we were starting to think about correspondence and letter writing. So perhaps it might be useful. The title is called Improvising Theory, Process and Temporality in Ethnographic Fieldwork, but I think it applies beyond just ethnography or anthropology, but really to any postgraduate student might find that useful. I am looking for hands. Looking for hands. Smangaliso, please go ahead.
Hello. I just wanted to say thank you for the introduction of letter writing as a way into the academy, because as a writing fellow, as a person who's been a writing fellow for the past 2 years, I've realized that this idea of giving feedback really does work, and helping the student to be able to communicate with someone they can relate to, like a writing fellow who's round about the same age or of the same demographic. But one thing that I've realized was that with the feedback from all the colleagues from different universities was that letter writing really does it really does catalyze a relationship to the feedback and a relationship to the process of writing that allows the student to actually not just view the feedback for feedback, let me implement it, but it forces the student to implement and be part of the process of writing, as opposed to it being a detached writing that you're writing to fulfill certain assessment criteria. So I'm really grateful for this introduction of letter writing, and I hope that within the discipline that I am a writing fellow for, which is cultural policy and management, that we try and infiltrate it into the process of writing and the process of being a writing fellow. Thank you.
No, thank you, Smangaliso. And I really think just foregrounding that relationship is so key, and is echoing much of what other speakers have foregrounded in their presentation, that this is not a disembodied thing. You know, when we're in the lecture theatre, when we have office hours, think, you know, it's tangible, it's embodied. There is a relationship, and so much of that we have to be very conscious of building these practices into this kind of like experience that's mediated by email and technology, and how powerful these letters can become in kind of mediating these relationships and building that intimacy that isn't just simply, you know, read these texts and come back to me with the right answer, but for them to be in conversation with you as the writing fellow, you as the lecturer, but also with the other scholars that they're engaging with. So I really like this idea of relationship building, because I think it's definitely been foregrounded in my students' responses, that they feel so isolated, and how helpful it is to know they're talking to someone, they're not just a random student number coming up on Ulwazi. So that's really, really great to hear. Jess, is that your hand up?
Yeah.
It is, but I'm also conscious of time. So
yes. I too am conscious of time as the person who started us running late. And if it's okay with everyone, could we maybe just have the last kind of 10 minutes to have any more questions and answers, and then I'll hand it over to Zimitri to wrap up our conversations. But I'm so excited. I'm just like, I was like waiting to go get my vaccine, and I'm like, I want to talk more about this. It's exciting. So please go ahead, Jess.
Okay, cool. No, thanks. I'll be brief, but it was just to say on the point of master students, one thing I didn't mention is that in this course where we had the two writing fellows, we also had a master student who was giving some of the lectures, and it was an opportunity for him to earn a bit of money, and because I had too much teaching. And what was really interesting for me was seeing how much, as a master student, he was also learning from the writing intensive process, even though he was really responsible for course content. So he wasn't explicitly working on the writing, he wasn't giving the feedback himself. But what we had were these incredible weekly teaching team meetings where honors, masters, and myself were able to deep dive into issues that were emerging in both second and third year anthropology courses. And I think that experience was pretty transformative for all of us, because we all learned so much on so many different levels. And Cassie's his name, and he commented afterwards that he'd never thought about his writing in those ways. And listening for him also to learn from Kanye and Lawrence, who, there's been some talk about hierarchies, and it really disrupted a lot of that, because he could see this master's student was seeing that the honors students were able to elicit these incredibly passionate responses from students in the class, which then informed their responses to Cassie when he was giving synchronous sessions and asynchronous instruction on various WhatsApp groups and emails and things. So it was very powerful, and I would really like to see a lot more of that introduced as a kind of as an expectation rather than an exception in master student teaching. And I think it would have tremendous implications for PhD work as well. And I think one of the questions I've been grappling with a lot is, how do you enable students to produce knowledge as well as consume it as a kind of active articulation of perspectives at a time when so much, particularly of the internet, is dominated by technologies from the global north? What does it mean to write into that? And can we afford to wait until everybody has a PhD before they start actually shaping the discussion? And it was great to see that in action amongst the team, and it's lasted a lot longer than the course, which has been really nice. So yeah, friendship maybe is something we haven't spoken about enough, of how much this kind of pedagogy enables friendship and the long-term implications of that for our life as scholars with hearts as well as brains.
And building community, which is something that I think I've desperately been looking for, and being part of like the different discussion groups has just been so helpful in recognizing that you're not alone. Some of your approaches might not be, orthodox, but those ideas can be incorporated and usefully integrated into our teaching and our learning. So I completely agree. I see your hand, Karabo, and also I want to nudge Leyya if you want to step in with a question or a comment, and then I'm going to hand it over to Zimitri. So please go ahead, Karabo.
Yes, thank you everyone for the feedback and for the direct response, Zimitri. I just want to add that, on the point of building friendship, and I think the letter writing is that, and needing community is that, speaking particularly from a Wits perspective, is that, a lot of us have internalized the hostile, the hostile nature of the relationships between supervisors and students. So sometimes you feel like, even when you're walking into the relationship or you're writing something, like the anxiety that comes with it, and whether it's based on real stuff or things that you've perceived or imagined, because when you sit on your own, our brains start to catastrophize a lot of what these relationships mean and what the consequences are for you and for your scholarship, because we literally do feel, a lot of us, like we are on our own. So it's also about kind of managing that anxiety. And I think, a regular writing practice is also a form of kind of self-therapy as well, in terms of handling that. So thanks a lot.
No, thank you, Karabo. And then Leyya, if I understand I've just put you on the spot, would you like to feedback on your experiences as someone who has gone from writing intensive course to then even facilitating as a TA and someone who coordinates the craft cafes?
I see you, but it's okay. I'm used to you doing these things. So I think for me, look, it's really, there's been so many learnings that have come out of it. And I think number one, as a student becoming that teacher, TA role, just being able to kind of have you to also feed back to and be there alongside with you. I think being able to see how that process is mapped and being able to understand the other side and what actually goes into making all of these decisions to eventually come out with that course, was invaluable. Because I think as a student, it's kind of like, it's a little bit mysterious. Suddenly there's just courses, you click something to register, and that's it. So seeing behind that and all of the workings and decisions that go into that has been really incredible. Number two, I think, being in this really cool but odd position where I'm still student, but I'm also teacher, but not quite, has been really nice, actually, because it's been I realized I was able to chat to, like in the craft cafes, chat to the students in a way that said, well, look, what are you struggling with? Because I know at this stage in my journey, this is what I, sometimes I grappled with, or sometimes I faced. Is this something you're feeling or not? And so it provided a really nice kind of bridge into the experience. And while, of course, it's not all the same, that type of language, being able to talk to a common or shared experience and seeing what new challenges they're facing and trying to learn together and address those, especially in this time of remote learning and things like that, and unpacking what it means to kind of engage meaningfully as a student in these times was really, really valuable. So I don't want to take up too much time and be mindful of that. But overall, I think, yeah, there's just been so many learnings that have come out of it. And just that, even that relationship with yourself, being able to call you up and be like, hey, so this, and this, what do you think? Or I had this idea, what do you think? And you also providing that space for me to do that allowed me, I think, the space in which to grow and really push myself to grow further than I would have otherwise.
Cool. No, thank you, Leyya. I think it was, yeah, thank you, before I start having my own chats and being mindful of time. So I'd like to hand over to Zimitri and just to, reiterate how grateful I am for the space and these conversations, because they really do, they do inspire me. So it has been really wonderful to be here with you all and hearing all these amazing things that people are doing with epistolary pedagogy. It's incredible. So over to you, Zimitri.
Okay, thanks, Nosipho, and thanks, everyone. Pamela, I'm just going to read the quote, and then if there's anything you want to add to bring closure, then you can do that. So when we did our run through of today's webinar, we decided that this was a good quote with which to begin to close the discussion. And it's a quotation from David Scott's book, Stuart Hall's Voice, and it was published in 2017. The letter is an explicitly speaking form. It is alive almost. A letter dispatched is always an act of address. A letter received is always someone heard from. The letter is enacted in the register of voice or the mimesis of voice in such a way as to call into being, to activate the dialogical presence of a specific interlocutor. In the case of the epistolary interlocutor, however, this presence of the other, my putative correspondent, is a physically absent one, unquote. Over to you, Pamela.
I can't say anything after that. That's wonderful. And many thanks to everyone for being here and for all the energy that you've brought. It's extremely creative. So congratulations to colleagues in all 3 universities and everyone with us today. Many thanks.
And also many, many thanks to Pam. I may have fallen off the wagon sometimes, and thank you for just holding this process and bringing us all together. You have been incredible, and I think you won't acknowledge yourself, so it's important that we also just say thank you for the amazing work that you've been doing.
Thank you. I'm totally delighted. I think lots of students and lots of people have benefited from this work. It's wonderful. Well done, everyone. And take care and get vaccinated.
Well, yes, we're getting vaccinated, and also we're looking forward to having this conference that we've been saying we want to do, and the many papers that Zimitri has published a paper. Well, it's coming out in ASNA, and Leyya and I are working on a paper together as well about this process. So I'm really looking forward to seeing also from Northwest and Stellenbosch, because I think this is really invaluable and important work. And an intervention that destabilizes the idea that there's only one kind of technological innovation, that we can use all technologies to really support our students' learning and our own learning as teachers.
Pamela, can I just ask you very quickly? The person who works in Namibia, is it called The Artist's Voice? Maybe that would
Yes, Dorian Harhoff.
Harhoff.
Yes.
Karabo, maybe that is a better text.
Dorian Harhoff. I can send that to Karabo. I've got that on my shelf. Yeah. And I think actually he's running courses as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pam. Please send it to me. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Hopefully those of us getting vaccinated, the under 35s, can do it. All right, guys. Have a great one. Cheers.
Congratulations, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Everyone, to Stellenbosch and to Northwest.
Yes, that wonderful music as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm definitely going to be going back to listen to some of these talks, and some of the exercises that they're doing in Stellenbosch are so amazing. I'm like, yes, my theatre self is really excited about all those ideas. I'm just like,
I'll turn off the recording now, shall I? Yeah, go on.
No, you can stop recording if you wish.